everybody that I'm around, whether it's you and Charlie or the guys I travel with and the guys at these tournaments, they're all pretty good guys. Like, yes, you're right. There's a lot of negativity, but don't surround yourself with that. Just stay positive. Whether you're a scoper or not, it doesn't matter. We all love fishing. We all love trying to figure out the puzzle.
You can take it to the bank.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, got the Honey Badger right here with me, back here on Take It to the Bank podcast. Let's give him a big round of applause. If it works, maybe. I guess we're just not going to give you any applause today. So
that's all right. It's a good.
I'll give you some here
morning.
give you some here for me. You are not supposed to be at home. You were supposed to be in between tournaments. Let's talk a little bit about the weather and how it's affected every open this year.
Yeah, we fished four events in 2 different divisions, and we have yet to fish a full event. And I believe of the 4 tournaments, we've had 5 days canceled. And that's not to mention some terrible practice days. But just got back from Arkansas. I felt lucky to escape there with my life. We fished the day we did compete. Was a pretty violent lightning during takeoff and then during the weigh-in. And thankfully, nobody was struck or injured. And then I've just never seen storms that violent as I saw. We were staying on top of a mountain, so that probably had something to do with it. But I was thankful to escape there and make it home unscathed. Like I saw, turned around 3 times because of roads that were washed out or underwater. And I saw where 3 different tornadoes had cut paths and, destroyed a lot of people's property. So, it was a pretty historic, I think, flooding event for the central United States. And I'm thankful to not be up there and having to deal with that anymore. But my prayers go out to everybody affected by those storms.
No doubt. It affected a lot of people, all the way up kind of through around the Mississippi River. Tennessee got it really bad. Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, all those places, had a lot of really, really bad weather. So not a good thing and definitely not a good thing when you're fishing tournaments.
No, I guess it's typical though for springtime in that part of the country. I can remember some bad storms on those Ozark lakes, earlier in my career with tornadoes and violent lightning, but just the duration of this particular storm, we had 1 round of it the first day of practice. And then it started during the tournament and it didn't stop till even after we were gone.
I think my biggest fear in the world is getting struck by lightning. Like doing what we do as much as I'm out, like if it starts popping around me, I'm under a boat dock like that.
Yeah, me too. And I feel like as long as I've been doing this and as many storms as I've been through, I feel like my odds are increased, So I definitely don't want to push it. It definitely makes me really uncomfortable. I actually didn't miss any fishing time. I know a lot of the guys did. I actually ran to a part of the lake that it wasn't as bad and got to work and things had changed for the better for me in that event. And, I would have loved to have fished more than 1 day there. I just felt like there's very few tournaments these days that line up and come to you. That one was coming to me, and I love fishing rising water and colored water, and they weren't really biting my jig that good in practice, but they sure were during the tournament. So
that's always a good thing. Yeah, I hate we only got to get 1 day, but you got out of there with a top 15 finish, and can't beat that with a stick.
It was actually a fun day of fishing. Caught a ton of fish, caught them really quick, and every move I made was the right one for those 8 hours I was out there.
Let's talk a little bit more about some right moves that we're making. That tournament was in Arkansas, but you are a Florida expert here on the podcast. And let's talk a little bit about April in Florida. When we started talking about, last month in March, we're talking about vegetation and how fish are pretty much spawning. They spawn in Florida from November to June sometimes, but how are things changing as a whole, in the state of Florida between the month of March and the month of April?
Well, I think the same weather patterns that affect the whole country, we obviously experience those too. But what we see here in April, it's really starting to get stable now. cold fronts aren't as severe. You got a lot of sunshine, you got longer days. And I feel like overall, April's one of the best months you can be on the water in Florida just because things are finally stabilized and are normal. I think you got a really consistent bite. I still, no matter where I'm at in the state, gonna concentrate on finding spawning areas. But the tactics may change a little bit. You probably got way more fry garters now than pre-spawners or spawners. So I would think about that, and that means one thing. Normally, it's topwater time down here.
That's fun. I don't care where you're at. When those fish start eating on top, like there's nothing any better, especially if you're wanting to take, someone that doesn't fish a lot, they don't have to feel their bait. They can see everything that's happening, and there's nothing more exciting than getting a blow up on a spook or a frog or whatever you want to throw.
Yeah, and the fish, I mean, they tend to get more grouped up just like everywhere else. And it's some phenomenal fishing. I mean, if you look at the last few years in particular, say from South Florida, the biggest weights of the year, the last few years out of Okeechobee came from the month of April. And I think it's a matter of the weather being consistent, that lake not having as much vegetation as it used to. It's finally stabilized, and those fish are setting up and getting after it. You can also look at this season, like the Elite Series event on St. Johns River. I mean, the majority of the guys in that tournament already in that event were catching fry garters. So it's something to just don't rule anything out in the month of April, but definitely be leaning a little more post spawn. And that those big fish they still like to be around that vegetation. So that's where the fry is going to go to survive, and that's where I love to fish. So
yeah, let's talk a little bit about the way the spawn happens and exactly what goes on between these fish. I feel like a lot of people think that it's just one movement and all of them go to the bank at the same time. I feel like we proved that for sure in Florida that doesn't happen. But as my opinion, I feel like a lot of these fish will go multiple times. They'll spawn with different males. They'll do that thing. Talk a little bit about the spawn and then how those fish act, from the time that they go on bed until the time that they leave their fry.
Yeah, I agree. Like I think the further north you go in this country, the smaller the spawn window is. I mean, the water is super cold. A lot of it is iced over. Then it warms up, and you have a big wave. We have big waves here, but ours is the opposite. I think we spoke about it in the previous podcast. Is our water has to cool off to trigger this spawn, but they're obviously not going to spawn on a cold front. So a warming trend after a cold front, obviously on a moon. I think all of that are little keys that trigger the spawn. But right now in April, like I said, we have probably the first time all winter that our weather is somewhat stable. I mean, it's pretty much warm and sunny every day. You got these long days, and if they've already spawned, I mean, if they're, I think this is a great opportunity for them to spawn again or to get that final wave in here, and then, once we get past this month, I mean, we're even going to start having some bluegill bedding and stuff this month on into May, and then obviously all through the summer here. So those are patterns that I look for a little bit later in the year, but this could be the early stages of that.
When a male goes, so let's talk about how a fish actually spawns. A male will go up and make a bed. The female are still out there with their eggs, eating shad, eating bluegill, whatever they're eating. They swim up, find a male, and then what happens when they find that male after they kind of get done bumping and doing the dirty there?
Man, I mean, a lot of people think the females leave immediately. I personally have seen that not to be the case. Like I've seen them hang around, guard those fry, and there are some of them move out. I mean, a lot of the country, directly after the spawn, the fish go the deepest they're going to be all year. So like Tennessee River is a prime example of that. The biggest fish in the lake spawn first. They're the first ones out there. I definitely think that goes on a little bit. You talked about the Harris chain, those shell bars out there, obviously a player. year round. And I definitely think it sets up that way, but they all don't go, with the amount of vegetation we have in our Florida lakes, there's a lot of fish live in that vegetation year round, whether it's on the Kissimmee chain, Harris chain, St. Johns River here at Seminole at my house. There's fish just about, any way you want to catch them starting about April.
Well, you mentioned fry garters there. So after they're bumping uglies, they get the eggs fertilized, the eggs hatch, and then we've got all these little bitty tiny fry. One of the coolest things I've ever seen is we used a little bitty screen to pick some up at American Sportfish Hatchery and got to see these things, and they're clear. And literally that long. They're so cool to watch, but they're baby bass. And the females pretty much go do their own thing, kind of recover after laying the eggs. They may stay shallow. They may go out on a bar. They may, do whatever they do. But the males hang around them quite a long time, and they're still pretty aggressive. A lot of fish that you catch during the spawn, to me, are fry garters versus, true bedding fish. What's your, how do you find fry garters, and what are you looking for right there to catch those fish?
Well, old school would be just see them with your eyes. I mean, to me, they all you mentioned clear. They almost look orange in the water, but they're very visible, especially if you get around cover. A lot of times you'll see them flicker on top. They're not really spooky from your boat, so you can get up there and inspect it. A lot of times you'll see the male that's guarding those fry. I mean, but nowadays, and I've done it. I've watched it on TV. You can find them with your scope, and it's just going to look like a ball of tiny little shad, and it leaves not much to the imagination when you can see the ball of fry and the fish guarding them, hanging around underneath them, beside them, but basically not far.
I feel like we used to think those fry stayed shallow, but a lot of those guys that were catching them at, I guess it was St. Johns River, they were catching them, 7, 8, 10 foot deep, and they were still guarding fry. But you could see the cloud of fry, and then you could see the bait fish right in under them if you watch live. And that's something those are fish that we never caught unless we caught them on a crankbait or something, a chatterbait a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I watched a decent amount of that tournament, just learning. And I'll tell you, Jay Shakurit, Shane LaHue, those guys put on a clinic with that. Like they didn't fish for one if it was under 3 pounds. They covered a ton of water. They're very efficient at catching those fish, and I learned a lot by watching them. That machine, and we've discussed it. There's a lot of negativity surrounding it, but it has taught me a lot about bass fishing, a lot about bass behavior, and there seems to be this. And I don't want to get off track here, but we brought the scope up, and there's just like the old guy theory that are anti-scope and all the young kids are scopers. And I just hate for it to be that way. We're all fishermen. That machine is an innovative piece of equipment. And we've always been innovators since I started, whether it was with a tungsten weight, braided line. And, I actually have enjoyed playing with it, learning it. And that was one reason that particular event at St. Johns River, I was glued to it just because I was learning by watching those guys.
It's something that really didn't come about until I feel like last year or 2 years ago, when the opens were at Bugs Island, Kerr Reservoir over on the North Carolina-Virginia border. And a lot of those guys were catching fry garters on scope. Was the very first time I'd heard about it. And I was like, wow, this is nuts. Those go a lot deeper than we ever thought. We would see some of them up shallow around beds or around little pieces of cover or whatever, but they go, they'll be on a stump in 10 feet of water, and they're still guarding fry. They're doing the exact same thing. We just never knew they were there.
Yeah, probably in certain lakes, probably much deeper than that. Just depends on water clarity and the region of the country. Typically our fish here in Florida, our water's a little darker, more tannic looking. I think 10 foot will be pushing the limits, but it definitely in some clear water areas that is possible.
It's hard to find a spot that's 10 foot deep in a lot of lakes down there. Let's go to, when we talked last time, you had mentioned that contour maps weren't very useful in Florida just because most of these fish are vegetation based, and that vegetation changes from year to year with hurricanes, with high water, with low water, with whatever.
Yeah, that's
so let's pull
true.
up the
I
Harris
mean,
chain.
you can't pigeonhole it like that. Like obviously, like my home lake Seminole it's got three big rivers that feed it, and contours are important there. I mean, but a lot of South Florida lakes, are so shallow that it's pretty, and the vegetation changes so rapidly. I mean, I just don't think they're nearly as important as they are throughout the rest of the country in Florida.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So right here, we are on the Harris chain. Lake Harris, Eustis, Dora. I guess a pop could be around here somewhere. So when you get here, this is one of the most famed tournament fisheries in the country, especially down in Florida. What are you looking for? And let's talk about some good areas and how to find them.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of history on this particular chain. I think there's not a single lake in that whole chain where a tournament hasn't been won. But for me, I love fishing grass. I'm gonna cover as much water as I can and try to find the healthiest grass. And typically, Hydrilla is the one that I look for. You can associate that with cleaner water, more oxygen in the water, and for some reason, it's a magnet for big fish. Obviously, like the last few times I've been there hasn't been a whole lot of hydrilla in Lake Harris. And the guys that have caught them there really good have caught them out offshore on shells. And that's another very viable pattern there. And a lot of that bite is dictated by wind, current, stuff like that.
Let's talk about shell bars. It's a Tennessee River deal. It's a deal anywhere that there's current, and you really don't think of current in Florida that much, but there's quite a bit there because all these things are river fed. All these chains, don't matter, if it's the Kissimmee River on the Kissimmee chain or, St. John's River or the Harris chain, they're river fed, and current's what I understand makes shell bars, correct?
Yes. And even on the Harris chain, I mean, there's a lot of natural current. There's a lot of creeks that feed that system. And there's also, anytime the wind blows, you got a lot of water movement from lake to lake. Our lakes are very flat and shallow, and you get a big north wind, it's going to push the water to the south side. So you got current going that way. Then when the wind subsides, you got the water coming back. So all of those things, like your little cursors on a main lake point there, it's obviously a place that's separating two big bodies of water. That's an awesome area to start looking for stuff like that.
How are you finding? Well, let's back up just a little bit. Will these fish immediately when they get done spawning, will some of them go to these shell bars, or is it a slower transition between, spawning flats and bed fishing and fry guarding out to these main lake shell bars?
Man, I think those shell bars on that particular body of water are just places they like to go feed. I don't really think that the St. John's River is any different. I think it's like an all-you-could-eat buffet for those bass out there. So, even during the spawn, pre-spawn and post-spawn, I think those are all, on this particular body of water, as well as like the St. John's. I mean, those are awesome places to hunt them. I mean, for me, old school would be 2D. You can find them, but obviously side scan is the biggest, tool that we have that I think those shell bars stand out. And then obviously, fishing those now with forward facing is a lot easier than it used to be. You're not guessing whether there's one there or not, trying to talk when you can see it.
For sure. That's why it's changed the game so much. For good or for worse, we don't have to argue about it. We can just say it's changed the game, and I feel like everybody knows that. What kind of like this is a giant area? I guess this is Griffin here. Harris is just south. This is north.
Yes, I believe it is. Yes, that's Griffin.
Okay. Let's say we're going to start on Griffin. What kind of an area? This is it's a big old body of water. What kind of area are you going to start looking for a shell bar?
Well, north of your cursor there in that particular lake, that's more of a shallow flat, and it's a grass filled flat. There's always a bunch of schools of fish out there. It's so much grass normally that I'll be looking for holes and clear spots or shell beds within that grass. But that's all shallower. It definitely shows it on contours there, contour mapping, that you don't have the depth right there that you have on the south end of that lake. So from that big main lake point that your cursor was on south, it's a lot deeper. There's also a lot of artificial fish attractors in that lake. And those, most of those, from my recollection, go from about 6 to 7 to about 15 feet deep. So that's another pattern as we transition more out of the spawning phase later in the year that I would be looking for.
What does a shell bar look like on side imaging?
It's going to just have a lot brighter return.
Okay. Clear bottom, no grass.
Yeah, I mean, basically, you got a lot of muck, a lot of soft bottom down here. There's a lot of decaying, dying vegetation, and it's just going to give you a really dark, weak return. Those shells are going to look like somebody shining a flashlight in your light, shining a flashlight in your eyes on that screen. And, it's definitely a hard bottom and a shell bottom is pretty easy to distinguish now with the side scans that we have on our boats these days. And everybody, all the electronic manufacturers, I think, are pretty on point with their products now. They're all much better than the first few generations. Just spending a little time. I love to have mine zoomed way, way out and have crank the juice to it, turn that sensitivity up, and it's amazing what you can find in a relatively short amount of time.
What you mentioned there is something I feel like a lot of anglers that are even hardcore about their electronics miss. We don't care if we're talking about live scope settings or we're talking about down imaging side scan settings. I want to see everything that's there. I don't want the computer inside this unit telling me what it wants me to see. I want to see everything there. So cranking your sensitivity up and having some fuzz on your screen, to me, is a really important tip for people. Everybody wants these perfectly clear images with the fish, the ones that they make their TV commercials out of, with the bridge, and you can see everything and there's no fuzz. It's all black around it and it's just the perfect image. Though in real life, those don't happen a lot. That's TV bullshit. They're all great and you can see a ton of detail, but to see the most detail, you need to have your sensitivity turned up on everything, not to where it blows it out, but there's a happy medium there. And I try to run all my electronics a little hotter than the average guy just so I can see more.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That's with side scan, forward facing. The only thing that I will caution you in Florida is, especially if we got a bunch of wind and it stirs that sediment up, then you've got all these particles in the water and you will have to back it down a little bit. So, obviously a calm, sunny day where things are settled down, you can crank it up a little higher. But that is something that I agree with you. I think your average angler doesn't play with his settings enough. And it's something that I'm going to adjust pretty much all day long, every day. If I'm graphing or scanning or scoping, I'm going to, from spot to spot, from lake to lake on that particular chain you're on, it's going to vary. And you want to get the most out of your electronics, and having everything in manual settings and what you described, almost blowing it out, is where you're going to be able to see the most detail and get the most out of your electronics.
I'm going to say I change mine every time I set my boat down, but probably every other or every third time. Typically I'm pushing sensitivity up, pushing sensitivity down, brightness, contrast, depending on, they all call them something different, which it turns out it's the same setting. But yeah, play with it. Push buttons. That's the reason that son of a bitch has got so many buttons, so you can push them and get this thing dialed in. And that's the only way you know how. Let's talk about where to go idle and try to find these. To me, growing up in Tennessee, fairly familiar with the Tennessee River and some current. the reason that this little pocket is here is probably because the river, is flowing down through here and hits this in a way and kind of washed that out. But to me, right here in this area is where it all necks down. And you're going to get current moving, with a south wind, you're going to get current with a north wind. Is this area right here a good place just to go start looking because it necks down and it's a little bit tighter?
It's definitely a good area, and it's really the first deep water off that huge flat to your north.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of it just depends in that particular lake how the vegetation is, that they do a lot of spraying. If the grass is healthy, I think that the fish are going to tend to lean on staying in that grass, especially if it's green hydrilla. If there's not much grass, the fish obviously got to go somewhere. So I'd be looking in that area of the lake where your cursor is, looking for shell bars, fishing some of the fish structure that's been put in that lake. All that on that south end of the lake is much deeper and much more conducive to that. Some really deep Kissimmee grass lines down there as well. And you're talking about a guy that loves to fish vegetation, and normally in April you got a lot of growth. So for me personally, I'm probably not going to go out there with that as a game plan on day one. But if that's your strength, then by all means, there should be plenty of fish out there this time of year. Those post spawners there should be enough of them out there where you could have a good event doing what you like.
You mentioned hydrilla, and you also mentioned Kissimmee grass. Anytime I go to Florida, I'm amazed at the different kinds of grasses that are there. Like there's a smorgasbord of salad. There's hyacinth mats, there's lily pads, there's arrowhead pads, there's milfoil, there's hydrilla, there's all this, gator grass. There's all this kind of stuff. I know hydrilla is kind of your number one, but Kissimmee grass is one of those things that it's really easy to find, and you don't really have to know what the difference between hydrilla and milfoil is. Like Kissimmee grass looks like hay on top of the water. It sticks out typically.
Yeah, and they like it. Like I don't think they prefer it like hydrilla, but I just think hydrilla puts off a little bit more oxygen. It's always a little bit cleaner around it. But the Kissimmee grass, if there's a body of water in Florida that doesn't have it, I haven't found it yet. Like it's everywhere. It grows pretty deep. Those on Lake Griffin where you were just looking. There's some you can sit in 7-8 foot of water, flip the outside edge of that grass. Sometimes, they're way over in it, but it's always, and I think we discussed this before. It's always the little subtle things, little subtleties that seem to, you need to key in on. Like it can be overwhelming no matter what kind of grass you're fishing, but starting on an edge, trying to dissect it, just trying to get a bite. That's what I key on is just subtleties, points, or a mixture of vegetation. Like there's always different kinds of vegetation mixed in with that Kissimmee grass. Could be pads, could be a mix of hydrilla. If you can find 2 or 3 different types of vegetation all mixed together, it can be a gold mine.
So this is a really, thick Kissimmee grass patch. It's the very first one I could pull up here, just Googling, and it's got a point right here. It's got a couple of pockets. And this edge right here is going to be the deepest part on it, obviously. So what kind of baits are you going to throw on a Kissimmee grass edge like this?
Well, I love early mornings to start with topwater baits on those points and stuff or pockets. As the sun gets up, obviously, I'd pick my flipping stick up. They love a stick worm there. A stick worm and a sinker is hard to beat. Obviously, the thicker the grass, the heavier weight you're going to need. But little lanes, obviously, if you're going to target spawners, shad spawners, we had an event there a few years ago. The shad were spawning behind the Kissimmee grass. So between the bank and the Kissimmee grass, a lot of times it'll be a little bit more protected, a lot cleaner. All of those are things that, this time of year I would definitely take a look at. That shallow bite behind it can be awful lot of fun.
Let's talk a little bit about shad spawning. That's my favorite thing to do in the whole entire world. Like I can't wait until the end of April here because you set your boat down, and even though shad are there, it's not a guarantee that bass are. But like if they're there, you're getting bit and you're getting bit quick on moving baits on bait casters. Like it's amazing. And shad spawn in Florida just like they do here. Obviously, it's going to be on vegetation. There's not a lot of hard cover, maybe some riprap or something. But talk about the shad spawn in Florida.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It can go on for several months. It could actually happen. You had the Harris chain pulled up the last time I fished there in a big tournament was a BPT and Odd Defoe won it. Swimming a white jig with, I think he had some blades on it, but it was a total shad spawn deal. The tournament was dominated that way with spinner baits, swim jigs. Some of them caught them even, shallow cranking up there. But that whole shad spawn deal was happening behind that Kissimmee grass, on seawalls, on cypress trees that are in that chain of lakes that we've been studying today.
So you need harder cover than just a maybe not a Kissimmee grass line, but like a hydrilla grass line. They're not going to spawn on that. It's going to be on more visible cover.
Well, they definitely will. What I remember from that particular event, early in the morning, they were spawning everywhere. Outside line, anything kind of hard. As the day went on, they tend to move shallower and got on that harder cover, and a lot of that had to do with because there was shade up there. And if you had shade, those shad spawned all day long. Once the sun got up, it killed all that stuff out. And, on the outside line of the Kissimmee grass, the hydrilla, that stuff, it kind of died off where the stuff next to the bank in the shade. If you go back and look at that particular event that, like I said, Alt won, it was shade and it was hard cover near the bank.
I mean, I feel like a shad's kind of like an insecure girlfriend. Like they don't want to make love in the light. They want to make love in the dark. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You're probably right about that. But it's a really fun time to fish. That's probably why we both like it so much. And if those shad are spawning, you just know it's just a matter of time where you're going to get a bite.
What? So we've talked about 2 or 3 different kind of techniques. We've talked about shell bars. We've talked about, grass fishing with, for post spawners there with fry garters, that kind of thing. Now we're talking about a bait fish spawn. Techniques are going to be different depending on which one, that you're fishing. Obviously, a Texas rig stick worm is going to be something you're going to throw all the time. Probably, I'm assuming a prop bait is a deal that you're going to be throwing all the time. Let's go through each of these scenarios and talk about some baits, some rod, reel, line setups that you're going to throw in all 3 different ones.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we mentioned
start with shad spawn.
Yeah, I'm going to start with some kind of topwater, probably. I do love a prop bait year round here. I'm never going like particular shad spawn. I mean, a buzz bait's good. Any type of swimming weedless bait, like Zoom makes 2 that I love. One's a horny toad. The other is the uni toad, which is a little bit bigger profile and a more swim bait type tail. So those are 2 baits that I'm gonna have on first thing in the morning that allows me to fish everything from 6 inches deep out to the outside edge of that Kissimmee grass. Those are going to be things that I try there. Then obviously like a swim jig, I don't know that, or a swimming worm, like a mag speed worm, 2 things that I never go fishing without. That's going to cover everything. I mean, if you're just going to give me one bait for Florida, that speed worm's hard to beat. Like I can catch them on a shad spawn, I can catch them fry garden, and I can catch them out there on the shell bars, just maybe rigged a little bit different way.
Will you throw, as far as a color on that, when you're around shad spawn fish, are you throwing white or a real bright color like that? Or are you still sticking to a, watermelon or June bug type color? Black and blue.
I have caught some fish on a white colored worm, but for me, I try to keep it simple. I throw a June bug or I throw a watermelon candy. That's what stays in my boat all the time. That's the swim jig. I'm definitely going to go to a white swim jig in the shad spawn, but there will be a black and blue one not too far away as well too.
As far as sizes on a swim jig during the shad spawn, do you go heavier so you can reel it faster, or do you stay, a little bit lighter so you can really float it over the cover and it's more of a slower presentation?
Situational. I'd say it's situational. From a quarter to a half, I'd say I'm going to start with a 3/8 and go from there. Just depends on how the fish are feeding, the depth I'm fishing, water clarity, all that kind of stuff, how active they are. A lot of times, even if I'm fishing super skinny, I'll go with a half, making them react, covering more water. A quarter ounce is going to take me a little longer. I'm going to fish a little slower, but sometimes they like it floated over their head really slow. So that's why we make them in all different sizes.
I think that's something that's so cool. And I throw a swim jig a lot around the shad spawn here. We'll fish marinas or something like that. And you've got to get that bait a little bit deeper. So I've thrown a half, pretty much all my life. But then you talk to a guy like Wes Logan, who is a swim jig expert. That's a swim jig we both throw, is the Arc Wes Logan swim jig. And he throws a quarter or a 5/16 like 90% of the time in those Coosa River places, because you're floating it over bank grass, and it has to be that smaller swim jig. But now you get down to Florida and you're going to have 3 or 4 tied on, different colors and different weights, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like fishing Kissimmee grass in particular, like if it's 3 or 4 foot deep and the fish are kind of in the middle to bottom of the water column, and they're not, they're not coming up, they're not aggressively feeding, then you're going to have to go to that 3/8 or half. It's just something that's day to day. You get a low pressure, you get some clouds, they may move up, start blasting. You may want to go with the lighter one to keep it up. Wes is a great fisherman. Great. We cut our teeth on the Coosa River, both of us, and he did a good job with his swim jig. And I would say that he tends to go a little lighter than me. I've fished with Wes. We've swam jigs together before, and I tend to like a little heavier one. He tends to like a little, just a touch lighter one, but different strokes for different folks, and that's what works for him.
So a swim jig, a topwater, a buzzbait, horny toad, something like that you can reel across the top of the water. Anything else on a shad spawn?
Man, vibrating jig. We did mention spinnerbait. You can't fish shad spawn without a spinnerbait.
Of course.
Vibrating jig, I think, is taking the place of that a lot these days. And I think a crankbait's a very overlooked shad spawn bait, especially in Florida. People get intimidated with all the grass, but it has been proven here. And if you're going to fish out there, a little bit deeper, there's been a lot of tournaments won on that. Harris, Shane, cranking.
And you can find to find a shad spawn, you can either see them flipping on top of the water, or you can watch them. You can actually watch them on your live scope, follow your bait in, or you throw a spinnerbait, throw a chatterbait, anything like that. You'll see them chasing that bait, bumping with it, trying to do dirty things with it.
Oh yeah, you can see them. You can see the shad actually spawning on live scope too. Like, doesn't have to be following your bait. That's obviously going to go together, but yeah, and it's definitely a deal that you can make last all day. It's just not when it's the peak of it. It doesn't have to be, like I said, just first thing in the morning, or it can actually go all day long during the peak of it. I've seen that not only in Florida, but on all the Tennessee River lakes as well. When most people give up, they're still spawning. They're just a lot deeper, from my experience. Like say at Gunnersville in the grass and stuff.
Yeah, like that insecure girlfriend, they just don't like the lights on.
That's right. I remember starting a lot of tournaments with a 3/8 ounce spinnerbait, and ending the tournament with a 3/4, just following them out all day. But they were spawning all day long, whether most people realized it or not. And Florida's the same way.
That's cool. A lot of people talk about you can't catch shad spawn fish after the first hour of daylight, but I found that too. With Live Scope showed me that a couple of years ago at Pickwick. Is we started fishing a shad spawn that morning, and that afternoon they were still spawning, but it was in 10 foot of water, 8 foot of water, or something like that. It just they got a lot deeper.
Go
ahead.
It's an exciting time to be fishing, because that stable weather that we spoke about earlier, it's what's really ignited all of this stuff happening. You got bluegill thinking about spawning. You got the shad spawning. You still got a few bass spawning. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of life this time of year, and that's definitely something. Regardless of what lake I went to, or even in the Gulf of Mexico, you just need to be around life.
Let's go over to shell bars. Probably not your favorite thing to do, but a deal that's obviously you can catch them. Still going to have that swimming worm on.
Yeah.
What other baits work there out a little bit deeper on those bars?
Man, it's hard to beat a big swim bait for me. I love fishing a big swim bait on shell bars, but the same thing, especially if a big spinner bait, heavy chatterbait, a cranking swim bait, and then if things, if the fish are there, they're just inactive. It's hard to beat the old ball and chain. Like down here, believe it or not, like that, there's a lot of fish caught on the old Carolina rig down here.
It's something that not a lot of people talk about, but you can sure enough catch them on a sea rig down there. And you don't think about deep cranking, but I don't know if you watched the Elite Series event at St. John's River, but John Garrett stomped their ass on like a 5XD, 6XD deep diving crankbait like he's used to fishing on the Tennessee River.
Yeah, not only John catching them in that particular event, but look at what Brandon Polinick did at Okeechobee. Same thing. That they're I'd say isolated kind of places that you can do that on those lakes. But still, I mean, I think it's something that those fish aren't accustomed to seeing, like, say, a Kentucky Lake ledge. Those fish are very in tune with what a crankbait is.
For sure.
The fish in Florida don't see it all the time. What they're used to seeing is those swimming worms and stuff buzzing over their head all the time. And another key bait that I have not mentioned yet that's one of my favorite ways to fish is just a hollow body frog. I mean, this is a great time of year, no matter where you're at, not just in Florida, but that hollow body frog for some reason just always seems to get a better than average bite.
Obviously, you're not throwing that frog on a shell bed. They're going to be a little bit deeper. That's going to be more for a fry garter, right?
Yeah, but I wouldn't overlook the topwater thing. I mean, typically our shell bars aren't so deep that if there's a lot of fish there, a lot of times you get them fired up. That topwater bait, like a big spook, is an awesome way to get a big bite.
What baits are you throwing when you're looking at fry garters?
Well, I mean, not just Florida, but the wacky rig is probably going to be your number one go-to, no matter where I'm at. Like something about the way the worm falls when it's weighted in the middle. If it's such thick cover where you're getting hung with a weedless type hook, I mean, then obviously you can rig it in the middle, or just rig it Texas, not Texas rig, but just weedless. Mm-hmm. And that's another way where you can get a few bites. But that's going to be your number one fry garden bait, just about anywhere you go.
A lot of those guys on the elites were throwing a jerk bait. Is that something you do very much, just because you could get it down on those fry garters and it sit?
I've done it a pretty good bit since I saw them guys do it. Prior to watching how dominant that was, I had done it some, but not a whole lot. And especially with doing it with forward-facing sonar. I mean, this is, I guess, my second year I've really devoted enough time to consider myself. I'm definitely not elite, but I can catch a lot of fish with it. I mean, watching those guys, that was a pretty eye-opening tournament to watch as far as what you can do with a jerk bait during that time of year with fry garters. I
mean, we've got that. That's a really good way. You're going to be able to catch fish one of those three ways throughout. I don't care what lake you go to in the state of Florida in the month of April. They're going to be one of those three places. And even you mentioned brush piles or man-made fish attractors, whatever you want to call them. Like, that's a sneaky deal not a lot of people talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I fished heavy hitters on the Kissimmee chain this same time of year last year. And we had a few storms like hurricanes come through. There was a ton of brush in all of those lakes. And not deep. Most of it was 5 to 7 foot, and a lot of that brush shallow. But there was a lot of fish caught, not only by me, but my competitors targeting brush in Florida. And I just think it was something that those fish had never really seen a lot of that before. Now, but they definitely related to it, especially like all the places down there that had a lot of hydrilla. And then, it dies because they spray it or whatever, high water, whatever causes it to go. Those fish, that's the next available thing. It's just an ambush spot for them to feed. And it was very effective last year in that tournament.
And it's something different. No matter who I talk to, if it's you, if it's Brandon Cobb, if it's Jeremy Logger, everybody's looking for something different. If there's 10 acres of hydrilla out there and there's two brush piles sitting right at the edge of the hydrilla, there's going to be there's a lot of bass in the hydrilla, but there's going to be bass in those brush piles because it's different. It's something that, sticks out. It's just a little bitty subtle difference.
That's correct. That's correct.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of what you need to do in Florida. Let's get into a fish story or two. I want to know Randall Tharp's the one, if there's one fish that changed your career early on, later on, made you win the cup, anything. I want one fish that changed everything.
Man, that's tough. I don't know if there's one particular fish. I mean, there's definitely particular events and things that happened that are very memorable. Obviously the cup was life-changing. It was a life-changing amount of money.
Where did you win it?
Red River. And I'd fished Red River a few times prior to that and done good every time. But that particular event in the middle of the summer, catching them super shallow in backwaters and not having much regard for my equipment, driving over dry land to get in a couple holes.
Really?
That was very memorable. And I'll tell you, there is a fish catch from that particular event that stands out, because I would start every day in a backwater. I'd run 3 or 4 backwaters, and then I'd end the day close to the ramp, which is ultimately where I caught the biggest fish and where I won the tournament. So the first day, I didn't have a very good start. I didn't have a fish at 11 o'clock, but I didn't change my strategy. And at 12 o'clock, I pulled into the little backwater by the ramp, and I started catching big ones. And I'll never forget this, because my wife, Ann Lefebvre, Guido and Dion Hibden, and Stella were all standing probably 40 yards from me on the bank and watched it go down. And I'll never forget catching a 4-pounder and a 6-pounder on just about back-to-back cast and culling like some 2-pounders. And I remember Guido and Dion, Stella, my wife, all over there cheering for me. And I believe my buddy Rob Newell was there too. Had just got off the water from covering the tournament and was photographing me as well during that time. So if there's a memorable fish catch, that was a trying day because it didn't go like planned until that moment. So yeah, that's probably the biggest tournament I've ever won. Definitely financially it was. And
what'd you catch those 2 fish on? What kind of cover were they on?
I was fishing a huge lily pad stump field, and I caught those fish leaving the stump field, and it was actually a foot deep of white sand that I had drugged my boat across to get in there. And that was the same pathway that I used to get in, that those bass were swimming in there. And I visually saw the 6-pounder swimming before I cast and caught it. And I'll never forget that fish as long as I live, just swimming across that white sand and leading him just perfectly, and him attacking the swim jig and boat flipping him. And ultimately, I think that was the biggest stringer caught during that tournament. And I caught them all with a bunch of eyewitnesses about 40 yards from me.
That is freaking cool. That's awesome. And a half, is that when it paid $500,000?
Yes. Yeah, I won $500,000. I was very fortunate to. I think Anthony Gagliardi won the year after me at Lake Murray, and I think he got $500,000. And then after that, it went to $300,000, which is what the championships pay right now.
Right.
But yeah, I've been around. I got to see $1 million paid out for a championship when I first started. So that was a long time ago. Things were a lot different, and yeah, some good memory.
Well, dude, Randy, thank you so much for hanging out and giving us, sharing some of that knowledge that has caused some of them gray hairs in your beard there. It's always fun. And again, I love hearing your take on it and how you fit, break down lakes and how you fish Florida. And thanks for helping us spread a little positivity. Gosh darn, the fishing industry needs some positivity right now.
Yeah, it's still fishing. It's still a lot of fun. And for the most part, everybody that I'm around, whether it's you and Charlie or the guys I travel with and the guys at these tournaments, they're all pretty good guys. Like, yes, you're right. There's a lot of negativity, but don't surround yourself with that. Just stay positive. And, whether you're a scoper or not, it doesn't matter. We all love fishing. We all love trying to figure out the puzzle. Man, April, no matter where you live, has got to be one of the best times to be on the water, whether you're in Florida, Alabama, up north, like things are happening. And that stable weather, it just makes for a lot more enjoyable trip than fishing when it's snowing or something like that.
People need to quit bitching on Facebook and go fishing. It's a month of April. Just go fishing. Get off Facebook. Go have fun.
That's 100% accurate.
Well, thank you very much, Randall. And we'll catch up with you here in a month or two. You can take that to the bank.
Yeah, you can take it to the bank. Hold the line.